I hope it's visible now.
Yes.
Yes.
Namaste and greetings. I, Priyanka Negi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to this special edition of the Web Policy Talk series, the State of Environment Planet Talks. We're gathered here today for a critical and timely panel discussion on melting realities, the urgent need for a glacial law and governance framework in India. The program is part of the official launch of the International Year of Glaciers Preservation on 21st January 2025, commemorating the collaborative efforts led by the World Meteorological Organization (WMO) and UNESCO to mark the International Year of Glaciers Preservation 2025 IYGP 2025. The United Nations General Assembly has declared 2025 as the International Year of Glaciers Preservation to emphasize the urgent need for global action to safeguard glaciers, snow, and ice. The resolution also designates March 21st annually as the World Day for Glaciers starting this year. In recognition of these efforts, the IMPRI Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development proudly presents this panel discussion as part of its Web Policy Talk series dedicated to fostering informed dialogue on this critical global concern. To provide further context, we're sharing a presentation on screen which gives a comprehensive overview of key milestones, objectives, timelines related to the International Year of Glaciers Preservation. Purvi, can we have the presentation on screen? It's a brief presentation that has been provided by the IYGP committee to us. It gives the context for the various timelines which are related to this IYGP event. Proposed by Tajikistan and France, the initiative includes declaring 21st March as World Glaciers Day. It outlines key objectives such as raising awareness, promoting action, enhancing scientific understanding, strengthening policy frameworks, and securing financial support for glacial preservation. The timeline covers significant events like the Dushanbe Glacier Forum, World Water Day, COP29, and an international conference on glaciers preservation. Collaborative efforts led by UNESCO and WMO are supported through task forces, advisory boards, and platforms like UN Glaciers, focusing on global partnerships to combat glacier retreat and its cascading effects on ecosystems and communities. Now, let me introduce our esteemed gathering of experts who will lead today's discussion. Our chair for the session is Ms. Bhargavi S Rao, independent researcher and educator, environment activist, Bengaluru, visiting senior fellow at IMPRI. And our distinguished panelists for the session are Professor Anil Kumar Gupta, Professor and Chief Executive, Integrated Center for Adaptation to Climate Change, Disaster Risk Reduction and Sustainability, ICARS, IIT Roorkee. Mr. Soumya Dutta, Founding Co-Convener, SAPACC, South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis, former Advisory Board Member, UN Climate Technology Center and Network, and Visiting Senior Fellow at IMPRI. Ms. Ushashi Datta, Consultant Global South Fellow, Council of Energy, Environment and Water, CEEW, Dr. Smriti Basnett, Deputy Director, Future Earth South Asia Regional Office, Consultant Scientist, Devecha Center for Climate Change, and Dr. Zawang Namgil, Director and Senior Scientist, Snow Leopard Conservancy, India Trust. A warm welcome to all our panelists. We are truly honored to have such an accomplished group of individuals with us today. And without any further ado, let us start the program. I now request our chair, Ms. Bhargavi, to address our gathering with opening remarks. We welcome you, ma'am, and over to you.
Namaste. Thank you, Priyanka. And thanks to everyone at IMPRI for hosting this very important webinar at a very crucial point of time. And it is my honor to greet all of you at this important discussion on glacier preservation and governance, a topic that is becoming increasingly urgent in the face of climate change and environmental degradation. Priyanka has already provided us the context for our conversation. And so, glaciers are more than just frozen landscapes. They are life giving forces, and particularly in the Himalayan region, which is often referred to as the third pole, glaciers play a very critical role in sustaining water systems that support millions of lives. They feed major rivers like the Ganga, Brahmaputra, the Indus, which are vital for agriculture, drinking water, and energy production. However, these glaciers are receding at alarming rates due to global warming, with potential devastating consequences for water security, biodiversity, and livelihoods. So, this brings us to the pressing need for a glacial governance framework in India. While efforts to address climate change and manage water resources exist, they often lack a focused approach towards glacier preservation. A dedicated governance framework is now essential, one for monitoring and mitigating the glacier loss, protecting vulnerable ecosystems and communities, ensuring sustainable water resource management, and safety for all. So, in today's discussion, it is a step towards creating awareness and driving this collective action. We have this wonderful opportunity to build on the momentum of IYGP 2025 that has laid the groundwork for innovative policies and practices that will secure the future of our glaciers and, by extension, our planet itself. So, the communities that live around the Himalayan region are already facing the challenges, particularly the agricultural communities. And the agricultural cycles have already changed, rapidly affecting the region's very existence because a lot of the economy depends on that. So, this adds another dimension of being prepared and addressing adversaries to the region's economic challenges. So, what would it mean to be responsible, to be prepared, and to take action? How can the results of all the ongoing research be translated into action? And again, the responsibility does not necessarily and solely lie with the countries in and around the Himalayan region. How would the global north collaborate and support this initiative? These and more questions are definitely on top of everyone's mind. So, I really look forward to hearing from our esteemed speakers who bring a wealth of knowledge and perspectives to this critical issue. Together, let us explore actionable solutions to preserve these frozen reservoirs of life for generations to come. Thank you so much again. And so, we could probably start with Dr. Sevan Namgyel. Over to you, Dr. Namgyel.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. Thank you so much, Priyanka and Ms. Bhargavi, first of all, for inviting me for this very important webinar. And it's very timely that we talk about these issues because glaciers, as you rightly mentioned, that they are the lifeline of a lot of people living up in the mountains, in the higher reaches of the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau, and for that matter, all the other high regions across the planet. Let me just share a brief presentation. I've just put some pictures together. Actually, I don't have a. Okay, just a moment. Share screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. I have been asked to talk about the ecological significance of the Himalayan glaciers, and a disclaimer first: I'm not an expert on climate change or policies or legal framework that you are finally trying to get it. I'm not an expert in that, but what I can talk about today is the ecological significance. And I have been working in the Himalayas, in Ladakh, and many other parts of the Himalayas for a long time on wildlife, both birds and mammals. And I must tell you that it's really these glaciers hold high significance for mammals, birds, butterflies, humans, you name it. You know, a lot of animals in these high ridges, in these high mountains, are solely dependent on the glaciers. And if you take a plane from New Delhi to Leh on an early morning flight, you just see this sea of glaciers just trying to compete with one another that to for the tallness. They just kind of a sea of glaciers that you see. And so the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau are collectively called the third pole because it really holds the very high concentration of glaciers. And we have the Siachen Glacier, which is the one of the longest glaciers after the north and the south poles. And obviously, as Miss Bhargavi mentioned, that these glaciers are the source of many of these rivers that are originating in the Himalayan region, and they are the lifeline. All this water, the small, the rivers and streams and all of that provide water for almost two-third of sorry, one-third of humanity, mostly in the Indo-Gangetic plains. And let me now take you to the avian world, how some of these birds are facing challenges because of the melting glaciers. As you probably know, that there are a lot of birds crossing these high mountains. In this slide, you can see that the red shaded areas, those are the areas where there are a high concentration of mountains uh, of altitude of some 5,500 meters. And the middle one, you can see that those blue lines, they are uh, the routes that many of these birds take, because they cannot fly across over the high mountains. So they take these river valleys like the Sutlej River Valley or the Brahmaputra for that matter. And there are some birds you can see in the lower panel that there are some birds that are crossing these mountains. They just fly right over some of the highest peaks, including the Mount Everest. And I'll tell you in a while which are these birds and the kind of issues that they are facing. So this is the bar-headed goose, which is the highest flying bird in the world.
Sorry,
Can
yeah.
you hear me?
Sorry, hi, Shivan. We are
Yeah.
still on the first slide. I can't see
Oh,
your
it's not
slides are not
changing.
moving.
Oh, it's not moving.
Yes, Shivan. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now
Have
good.
to-
Yes.
Maybe. Okay, so I'll just go screen by screen then.
Can you put it on what is that, slideshow mode? That might help.
Okay, just a moment. Should I? Entire screen. I cannot share the entire screen, so it asks me window Chrome type. And this is what I have shared. Melting realities. Okay, now see if you can see it. Can you see it now?
No, I can't see it. I don't know if
Now we can see your Zoom window that is currently open.
Okay, just a moment. Then. Okay, Stop sharing. Okay, then I'll just go screen by screen. I think that's easier then. Can you see my screen now
Yeah,
here?
the
Okay.
bar-headed goose slide.
Bar-headed goose, yeah. So I won't go into the slide show more than. So this is the bar-headed goose, which is the highest flying bird. And so maybe I think you missed some of these slides, and I'll just quickly show all the network of rivers that you have in the high Himalayas, like here the Yarlung Tsangpo River, and that becoming Brahmaputra, and the Ganges River, and then the Indus River here. And what I showed was this slide with the red patch of peaks with altitude 5,500 meters, and these blue lines are the routes that some of these birds are taking. Excuse me. To cross the Himalayas, and then you have these the lower panel where many of these birds cross right over cross these mountains, right, flying right over them, and that is the bar-headed goose. One of them is the bar-headed goose, and as I said, that is the highest flying bird, and the previous highest flight of a bird was the Rappel's griffin. And after that, there was no other high flying bird recorded at that altitude. So the bar-headed goose flies across some of these high peaks quite regularly, and there have been a flurry of research looking at their physiology and all of that. But let's not talk about that. What I want to tell you about is these rivers that are originating from some of these glaciers. It's in this slide, you can see that here the Indus originates here, and it flows north westwards towards northern Pakistan, and then going to the Arabian Sea, and from here the Ganga River, and then you have the Yarlung Tsangpo River and the Brahmaputra. And obviously, these birds come across the Himalaya is the highest, the most formidable barrier for any migratory bird in the world. So that really, it's very taxing to cross some of these mountains. So because of these rivers that originate from these glaciers, they find a continuous stretch of wetlands along the banks of the rivers, and that's how they are able to cross some of these highest peaks on the excuse me on the northern side. You have the Yarlung Tsangpo, and the south of the Himalayas you have the Ganges River. And because of these wetlands, these birds are able to cross some of these high peaks, and that is where the significance of the glacier lies. And then you have these wetlands that are created by all these rivers and streams originating uh, from these glaciers. And you have some beautiful birds like the the ibis bill that you find along the Indus River, and the black-naped crane that that is found in the eastern part of Ladakh along some of these riverine pastures. And then, of course, the snow leopard. I cannot stress enough the importance of the glaciers for the snow leopards. As the name indicates, it needs a lot of snow to survive. And it needs a lot of snow to survive. And if the temperature then increases, it won't be able to survive in this kind of environment. And similarly, then you have the wild yak, which is also dependent on many of these the glacial rivers, the streams that are originating in these high altitude glaciers, and the Ladakh urial, which is a very important species. And then you have the Indus River dolphin. Actually, it used to occur all the way up to Ladakh some 300 years ago. Actually, there are some accounts of the Indus River dolphin occurring in Ladakh. Today, we don't have any Indus River dolphin in Ladakh, but it occurs. There's a small population in the lower, the downstream of the Indus in Pakistan. And the reason that probably these animals are not in Ladakh is because of the subsiding water, the lowering of the water level in the Indus. Probably that's why it does not, it has kind of gone extinct from these stretches of the Indus in Ladakh. And then you have the Eurasian otter. That is also a very important species that occurs in the Indus. It occurs in some of the deeper stretches of the Indus River. Wherever you see a deeper stretches of the river, then you find these animals. And obviously, with the melting of glaciers, the water level in the Indus will go down, and that will also kind of degrade the habitats for these animals. Similarly, there are fishes like the snow trouts that are a very important component of the ecosystem of the Indus River. For instance, here you can see the Indus River trout, and then the Tibetan snow trout. We have some 7 or 8 species of these trouts in the Indus River. Apart from the issues faced due to climate change, the decreasing water level, there are a lot of other issues that these species are facing. For instance, the introduction of the rainbow trout and the brown trout, they were introduced in Ladakh from Kashmir, and because of that these species are already kind of their populations are depressed, and obviously, as the name indicates, that these rivers sorry these fishes need very cold water, and they go upstream, migrate upstream to spawn their for spawning and laying eggs. And currently in Ladakh, there are a lot of issues. People are diverting water from the river and the streams to irrigate the agricultural fields, and they often kind of put weirs and put a wall in the streams and rivers, so these fishes cannot migrate upstream to lay their eggs. So that is another major issue that is faced by these fishes. And then obviously, as I also said, that ecology means human ecology also, and tourism is a big industry in Ladakh and many of the Himalayan region. And so if the water level goes down, then many people won't be able to kind of do this river rafting, which is such an important and lucrative business for many people. Here, I would like to draw your attention to the retreat of the glaciers. As you can see, these two, the glaciers are the Darangdurung River and the Parkachik River, glaciers in the Zanskar Valley. And here are 2 other glaciers, and they have been retreating continuously, and some 140 meters were retreated between 1979 and 1990. So it's really melting at a very alarming rate, as Ms. Bhargavi was mentioning. And with the melting of these glaciers, there are all these glacial lakes being formed at the base of the glaciers, and that is a measure, I think. Is a kind of a disaster in making, because in Ladakh and many other places across the Himalayas, there are all these little lakes are being formed at the bases of the glaciers, and people don't know, because I think the pastoral activities and the activities which took people into these mountains, those activities people are not practicing anymore. So they don't go to these glaciers anymore, so they don't know that these lakes are being formed. And so everyone knows about the glacial lake outburst floods, and Ladakh already experienced a few of them in the last decade or so. And so, yeah, this is a major problem. So currently we are actually working with a lot of colleges and the university in Ladakh to engage students in monitoring these lakes everywhere in Ladakh. So we take them to some of these glacial lakes and explaining and educating them about the possibility of some of these lakes breaching. And if you look at this, you can see these lakes forming everywhere across the Himalayas, and so that is something, a major disaster that I think people might need to deal with in the coming decades, and that is something that all of us should be concerned about. Last slide, I'll just tell you about another very important component of the cryosphere in the Himalayas, and that is the permafrost. And not many people talk about the permafrost these days. What is happening in Ladakh is that many of these small springs across the landscape, they are drying up, and that is because of in many cases is because of the lack of water. The permafrost melted away, and there not being enough permafrost for these springs to be replenished. And that is why many of the mammals that I told you about, the Ladakh urial and blue sheep and Tibetan argali, they now are coming down to the Indus River more and more for drinking. And so that really shows the importance of the Indus River in the long run, when all these permafrost also melts away. And if these animals do not have these small little springs across the landscape. And so that is another issue that all of us should be thinking about. And I think it's high time that we started thinking about this, and formulating policies and legislate and make laws about how to kind of protect these glaciers is really important. It's high time that we started thinking about this. So I think I'll just stop here. Sorry, I had something in my throat, but I would be more than happy to kind of tell you more about the ecology of many of the animals that I told you about, and how their lives are being affected by the melting glaciers. Thank you so much. Over to you, Ms. Bhargavi.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sivang Namgale, for drawing attention to everything that's happening in the Himalayan region with the melting of snow and the impact on all the birds and mammals and fishes, and the formation of the glacial lakes and the disasters it is going to bring in terms of all the economic activities. We will hold our questions till we finish with all the speakers, and then pick up the question answers. So now I request Soumya Datta to share his views. Over to Soumya.
Thank you, Bhargavi, and thank you, IMPRI, for organizing this important webinar. I remember 2 years ago, not exactly 2 years ago, but almost that way, COP28, in fact, there were a number of meetings, number of discussions on protection of glaciers and what to be done. And I got the opportunity of participating in a couple of this kind of discussions where actions were proposed, but I don't think it has progressed far. Let me start with the primary reason and how the topic is glacier protection laws. So one just clear comment is we can have there is a very clear need to act on this front, because the cryosphere is extremely important, as everybody understands, as Namgyal has clearly showed. It's not only for humans, but for many other life forms also, species also. But unless we tackle the primary cause of this loss and the destruction of the cryosphere, and that is buildup of anthropogenic greenhouse gases, you really cannot tackle just by laws the loss of glaciers, disintegration, fragmentation, and complete loss of glaciers and ice and the cryosphere. So that's a underlying understanding, and which has to be taken addressed at a very, very urgent level. Beyond that, let me draw attention to some of the factors that are happening in the Himalayas, some of the changes that are happening, like Namgyal said, one of the most important but also in focus is glacial lake outburst floods. We know from some of the studies are showing that if you take the Satluj River alone, the Satluj River and its tributaries, then over the last 5 years or so, the number of glacial lakes has almost doubled. Noticed glacial lakes has almost doubled from around 556 to 1020 or something. And this is happening in multiple places. But the danger is not only danger to glaciers and snow and ice cover in the Himalaya, the entire cryosphere, not only in the Himalayas, everywhere else, because a lot of other countries have been facing this. Some of the countries like, as we know, Argentina probably is the first country which brought in a law to protect glaciers. And maybe Chile and some other countries are also were considering. I don't know the latest status of that. But there are other forms of dangers to glaciers. See, one is the glaciers are melting very fast because of the warming environment. The air, basically the air-snow interface, that's causing this loss. But there is another factor, and one factor that Namgyal also pointed or also mentioned is very important. See, under most of these snow and ice cover, it's not only the glaciers, the ground covered by snow and ice. Snow ice generally has an albedo of around 0.9. That means roughly 90% of the incident solar energy gets reflected back into space. But the moment it gets the underlying surface get exposed, most of the surfaces have albedo of 0.17 to 0.2. That means only around 17 to 20% of the energy gets reflected back into space. The rest is absorbed. And that means it goes into a positive or amplifying feedback cycle. That means as you melt more, you absorb more solar energy. So you melt even more. So you absorb even more solar energy. So this is a dangerous vicious cycle, which in science called positive feedback. But since there is nothing positive about it, it's actually negative. So a lot of scientists have started calling it an amplifying feedback effect. So this is a clear danger that is happening all across the cryosphere. And this is being noticed not only in the Himalayas. You go to Argentina and Chile and these Patagonian regions. You go to European glacier mountain regions. You must have noticed news about Switzerland or other countries losing glaciers completely. So all of these are happening at an accelerated pace. And because of this amplifying feedback effect, the pace of change itself is accelerating. It's itself going up. So that's a very dangerous situation. And the second point in this is, in this negative event, which is called a positive feedback loop, is that once the surface under the snow and ice gets exposed to sunlight and solar energy, there are a lot of organic matter held in this kind of soil. And the moment it starts getting exposed, because it is much more absorbent of energy, the organic matter starts degrading in two fashions. One, mostly it is anoxic digestion, and methanogenic bacteria starts working on this. So methane, as you know, is something like 87 times as powerful a greenhouse gas as carbon dioxide in 20-year period. So there are two kinds of heating which is additionally added onto this. One is the extra energy absorption from the sun. The second is because of the excessive release of methane, there are two kinds of heating. One is local, because the methane buildup before it spreads in the atmosphere well, there is a local buildup. But it also generally goes into the atmosphere over a period of years. So it also adds to the warming that is itself in the first place causing the loss of the glaciers. So these are very dangerous, actually amplifying cycles which are working against the protection of glaciers. That's one reason why a lot of activities need to be controlled near glaciers. But I would also like to highlight some of the conflicting factors. See, glaciers are not only important for animals, glaciers are also one very good tourist attraction. In that sense, glaciers also give, particularly the cryosphere atmosphere, not only cryosphere region, it attracts a lot of tourists, it adds to local economies. Many of the Himalayan areas, many of the mountain areas attract tourists, not because of just the mountain standing, but the ice also. The glacier ice, snow. As we all know, whenever there is a sudden good snowfall in Manali or any other place, there is a rush of tourists. There is a need to control that, but it also there is a need to involve the local communities and to need to understand how the economies really relate to that. Because just by controlling some activities, you might also end up with a big conflict with local people and their livelihoods. And this is happening all across the Himalayas. I have been moving around the Himalayas for something like 35 years now. I was a mountaineer earlier. So around 35 years I'm moving around, and I'm seeing this increasingly right from Himachal to many of the areas in West Bengal, Darjeeling, and some of the areas even further east. So these are effects which needs to be controlled very clearly. But we also need to understand there are other impacts even without a law. Again, I'm not talking about that. I'm not saying, my point is not that there is no need for a law. There is a need for a legal framework for protecting the glaciers, protecting the cryosphere. But there are other areas where intervention can also give a positive result. As we all know, the Western Himalayas are more, particularly the rivers coming out of the Western Himalayas, are much more dependent on snow and ice melt than the rivers coming out of the Eastern Himalayas. Because Eastern Himalayas rivers get most of their water from the soil that holds the water, and it's basically from the rain that is held together in the soil and forest and all, which is not so true for Western Himalayan rivers, which are much more dependent on snow and ice melt. And in Western Himalaya, because of the tourism activity and one particular kind of tourism activity, that is individual diesel vehicles, diesel, as you know, emits lot more black carbon than petrol engines or other kind of things. So Ladakh, you go to Ladakh, like Namgyal, you are from Ladakh. Most of the Himachal areas that I go, we all see diesel vehicles in tens of thousands, maybe lakhs. And that generates lots of black carbon. There are also activities like burning biomass very close to the glacial areas, which also result in a lot of black carbon. So that black carbon actually does a disservice in the sense, in the point of time when it go and deposit over the snow and ice areas. Because being black, it tremendously reduces the albedo, increases the absorption of solar energy, and that very rapidly melts away the underlying snow and ice. So this is another impact, and even without a direct glacier protection law, we can intervene in multiple, I can give other examples, but I don't have time, I'll not go into that. There are other areas where you can intervene without harming the livelihoods of local people, because this is a conflict that one must address, because just protection by a legal framework without taking into account how local people are dependent on that, how their economies run on existence of the cryosphere, in what areas they are free access, to some extent free access to those areas. And because if you restrict many of these, like I'll not name a country which is highlighted often, which has done a very elitist policy, that is not probably possible in large part of India, Nepal and other places. So our neighboring country is a very elitist policy and they hype it up. But that kind of thing is not possible, where a very large number of poor people will have to depend in those mountain areas for their livelihoods on these cryosphere areas. So we need to take into account that also. So my last point of submission is that we need to map out not only the very well known, like because it is warming, the glaciers are melting. There are other dangers. There's the danger of one kind of amplifying feedback effect that I said, the danger of excessive methane emission because of exposure of soil, which is permafrost, and then that leading to further warming. And also because of the warming, what is happening over the last several years is because the air temperature is much higher, the deposition of snow is not happening as much as it used to happen earlier. So if you do not have snow deposition right in the beginning, which over a very long period of time gets compacted, turns into ice, and ultimately reaches those places in the cryosphere, you will not have, once you lose the snow and ice cover, you will not build up. So there is a massive net loss. And as we all know, the earlier, before mid 1960s, there was satellite measurements were not there. So we only had, and whatever satellite measurements were there, were unable to determine the depth of the glaciers and snow and ice cover. Now we also have capability of determining the depth of the snow and ice cover. So what has been shown that over the last 45 years or so, around 22 to 24% of the snow and ice cover has already been lost from the Himalayan glaciers and other frozen areas. So this is something which is extremely rapid, and the only explanation that has been given till now is the warming. So I'm saying that we need to go much beyond that, take into effect the amplifying feedback effects, take into effect the effect on the impact on permafrost, which is being exposed because the snow and ice cover is going, and then take into consideration and then make strategies of protection. Of course, there need to be legal framework, but we also know we have legal framework in India for protecting forest. We have the Forest Conservation Act, we have the Wildlife Protection Act, and we know that when the corporate interest, when monetary interest come into conflict with that, how all these laws and all these legal frameworks are either dismantled or completely disregarded. In fact, I am coming back today from one of these areas where a conservation area is within a conservation area, there is mining going, and a lot of these are being disregarded by the rich and powerful. So even if we are talking about enacting laws or bringing out good laws to protect glaciers, the impact cannot be positive unless we disconnect this at least partly to the corporate interest that is there in the mountain areas. So that's another part that Ladakh is facing, and the Ladakh movement is also bringing this up without naming anyone. So my point is that we should also do this, but we also look around, like the Argentine law, the glacier protection law, what Chile is trying to do, what I think Uzbekistan is another country which is trying to enact some kind of law. So by learning from what they have done and what the impacts are, of course, keeping in mind that our Himalayas are far more densely populated than any of these other areas. So if something has been done in other countries in legal terms, building a legal framework, which probably do not look too much into the population there, we need to improve upon them, look into the crores of people that live in the Himalayan areas, and then modify and bringing our own kind of protection laws, because our experience of some of the protection laws like this 30 by 30 and how it is going to marine protection areas, how local small scale fish workers are being displaced in the name of protection, these are extremely dangerous trend. So we cannot just go like going gaga over a glacier protection law. We'll have to take into all these factors together and then bring in comprehensive, people-friendly and glacier-friendly protection laws. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Soumya, for highlighting some of the key challenges other than the global impacts of just melting, all the local effects that are adding to the melting and not the building up of snow. That was very critical. And also for highlighting the fact that laws alone is not going to solve the problem. We also need a whole lot of local action, and how it has to be a ground up building and also locally relevant action. Thank you so much. I would now request Ms. Smriti Basnett to share her thoughts. Smriti?
Yeah, hello, I'm here. Thank you, Bhargavi, and thank you to all the speakers. Thank you. Can you go to the first slide, Priyanka? Yes, lovely. So in order to commemorate the launch of the International Year of Glaciers, what I specifically wanted to do was be more grateful to the glaciers and also to know their names, like we know our names as human beings and not detach ourselves too much away from glacier, which we think is a non-living entity. But I want to give an organic and I want to give a living entity to this glacier today. Also, I've been asked to talk and give my, give my talk on the scientific insights, which I will do. And as we go through my presentation, I would want to bring in few topics of the earlier speakers who already talked. You can go to the next slide, Priyanka. Yeah, thank you. So just wanted to acknowledge Sartaj for giving these illustrations. I'm just going to stick with this slide throughout my talk. And I want to bring everybody's attention also to the right image, to the image on the right, in order to understand the terminology, which I feel is very, very essential. And I would want to acknowledge our glacier terminology in order to know what's happening to our glacier features. So if you go to the right of my screen, we have divided the glaciers into three parts. Accumulation, that's where you have the feed from snow over many years of time, accumulates, gets dense, and becomes glacier. And that moving ice of glaciers is what flows eventually from the snout at the end. And that's where the rivers originate, the tributaries originate, and all the Himalayan glaciers and the world glaciers originate. The other portion, apart from the accumulation, is the ablation zone. That's where the melting takes place. Now, in order for a glacier to be in a perfect state, if a glacier is to be healthy, you will be getting the same amount of energy and snow, and the same amount of snow will also be melted out in the form of rivers and water in all our glacier rivers. But that's not the case what's happening today. I want to transpose to the left of the screen. Yeah. So what I want to do now is in that figure of me, I want us to understand what's happening, and I want to introduce what we study as glaciologists as the hypsometric curve. Nothing complicated. It's, say you're sitting down, and the height is the altitude. With reference to, because I've been studying the glaciers in Sikkim Himalayas, the Eastern Himalayas, that's where I belong, and I know the glaciers very well. But this is a general phenomena in the rest of the glaciers as well in the world. So we have the height, which is the altitude, the peak being, say, your Kanchenjunga, around 8,000 meters. And then you have an area. So the altitude to area gives you what is known as a hypsometric curve. Now, I want to bring attention to what's happening to this area. So as I explained earlier, we do have an accumulation zone, which you can see is the head region. That's where there's nothing much to hold it, but it gets dense and accumulates there. So that's where you have your snow falling first, and then it moves slowly in the form of ice, glacier ice, as it moves down. And the biggest dimension of our body is the belly part. That's where we have the maximum amount of ice in the world. And that is what we know, that is around, say, 4,500 to 5,600 meters in an average for the whole Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And then you have the ablation zone, which you see in the form of a leg. That's what you can relate as ablation. So you have the accumulation as the head and the shoulder area. The middle section, where you have the ELA. Now, what is ELA? It is called the equilibrium line area. In our geography books, in our junior classes, we knew something as the snow line. There's a message. Okay, we know something as a snow line, but then to go more into detail for glaciers or to understand the health of our glaciers, we want to go more into detail, and then we term this as an equilibrium line area. So this is the area above which there is permanent ice. And why is this ELA important? If you see the ELA right now, it's only one slide. So if you see the ELA right now is in the belly region that has the maximum amount of ice in terms of volume. And why is it so sensitive is because our ELA is rising, it's moving towards the shoulder, it's moving towards our head. And why is this alarming? Is that's a huge chunk of volume of ice and snow. Sorry. Yeah, am I back? Oh, sorry, I got a call. Okay, so the ELA area is important because in that mid region is the maximum amount of snow and ice. And as Dattaji also said, and Shuang also said that, we are concerned about global warming, we are concerned about the temperature rise, we are concerned about methane, but most importantly also carbon dioxide, because that's a gas which traps a lot of heat and stays in the atmosphere for more than 100 years, sometimes even thousands of years. Whereas you have water vapor, you have other gases which has a quick circulation phase. And because of this, our ELA is also rising, which means because of temperature rise, the ELA is rising. And what will happen in this years to come, in the first 10 years, 20 years, there'll be a lot of flow of water in the rivers, and even the locals feel that no, there's no scarcity of water. But eventually what will happen when this ELA hits that crucial stage, the tipping point that we talk about in Earth systems, when it hits that neck region, that's when we will not have rivers flowing, we will not have water in our glaciers, which also then takes us back to what's happening, to nature. Because as a student of geography also, we know that what goes up must come down. So if you look at the long time scale in the time scale, the evolution of the earth, we do have areas of glacial and interglacial period. It is natural, but the rate at which it is happening, the rate at which it is melting is very alarming. Now, I wanna also bring us closer to the change in landforms that's happening. If you go to the right side of the slide again, to the picture where you have the ablation area, you can see tiny dots of lakes being formed. So these lakes are being formed as glaciers shrink. We have heard of glaciers shrinking. We've heard of glaciers retreating. What happens is as temperature rises, we have the snout moving backwards. We have this snout, which is from where the tributaries come. It keeps moving backwards. And then what glaciologists do to study the health of a glacier, every year you go and you measure where the latitude, longitude of a snout is, how much it has receded. That's how we come to know the health of the glacier as well. In one of the glaciers that I was studying, and many of the glaciers through remote sensing in Sikkim Himalayas, there were lots of glacial lakes being formed in the ablation area. And over time, when I saw those images, or even when I visited the field over 10 years, 15 years, the small lakes, they coalesce and they form bigger lakes. And then eventually very big lakes as big as the size of football field. That's what's happening, and they are called the supraglacial lakes. In one of the glaciers that was a benchmark glacier that we had to study and find the snout, it was alarming to see that there was no particular snout. There were numerous snouts, there were numerous areas from which glaciers are flowing, which means that the language of glacier is changing, the terminologies of glaciers are changing. And eventually, again, if you go to the left side where the hypsometric curve is drawn, if you see, we were to identify glaciers with more than 2 square kilometer, 1 square kilometer area, but it was so difficult. Why? Because if you see in the ablation area, the leg that you see on the left side, it had totally disappeared, which means that it could not even define itself as a glacier. What remained was hanging glaciers hanging from the cliffs of those mountain peaks. So geomorphology is changing, the pattern of glacier flow is changing. And in all this changing environment, what we also have is we think of permanent structures downstream. We also do not consider that these are not something that's going to be there forever. So run of the rivers are very good. It's something which we always propagate. But coming back again to our glaciers, and also the phenomena which led to our glacial lakes, like few of our presenters also talked about GLOF event. And why is this so important in this age and time? As I mentioned, as the ELA, as the belly is melting, or as we move higher and higher, the whole chunk of ice and glaciers are melting, and snow is also melting. What happens is there's a formation of huge lakes, and the latent heat of water is more than ice, and lake leads to more melting. The water leads to more melting. Yes. And now I want to bring us back to the phenomena of GLOF and what happened in the Lona Glacier event in Sikkim in October. So as the glaciers were retreating, as the supraglacial lakes were coalescing and forming, there were huge football field sized lakes. And the sides of a glacier is known as moraines, which are the walls. So a few chunks of moraines would have fallen into the lakes and creating, like when you throw a pebble into a lake, what happens? You find ripple of water coming, right? So in the same way, when there's huge chunks of ice and snow and rocks, even triggers, there was a earthquake a couple of hours or days before, even that can trigger these moraines to fall into the lakes, which leads to huge tsunamis, those waves falling. And once water gushes, it keeps gushing. And these moraine dam lakes are only protected by loose debris. So once you have this loose debris gushed by this velocity of lake, it all keeps flowing down, because of which Chungthang village was also washed. But then coming back, I've tried to explain the science part of it in this human language. But then also the need for integrated climate governance is something I want to talk about. It's always the locals that are left behind. They are the ones who have the traditional knowledge. They know how things are happening. They know that there are, for example, in order to study like glaciers, in order to study what's happening to our permafrost areas or periglacial areas, you have these yak herders. You have the people living up there who's been seeing, they're like so close to nature, who give you lessons. And from their narratives, what I could understand being with them is that the grazing land has also moved up. And there are grazing land also in the lower regions of the glacier. But for yaks to survive, they need temperatures which are less than 15 degrees. There is grass definitely in the lower regions of the Himalayas, but then the yaks will not be able to survive in that warm condition. So things are evolving, just like the glacial landscapes are evolving, just like glaciers are losing its limbs, it's losing its leg, it's losing many ablation parts. There is a lot of evolution taking place. And what we know in glaciology is also something known as response time, which means somebody somewhere did 50 years, 100 years back, we face the brunt today, because conservation of mass, and it takes a lot of time for it to melt. So the response time is such. And then why haven't we been able to protect our glaciers? One is a global phenomena. We don't have the atmosphere as the political boundary. What happens in many regions of the world, the industrial age, it all also impacts what's happening in our Himalayas or in the developing countries, which started development very late in terms of the usage of fossil fuels, in terms of development in that way. But whereas if you look at few of the glaciers, in terms of protection, if you look at I particularly remember one of the glaciers I went to in New Zealand. It was the Frank Joseph Glacier. There, people, the trekkers, were not even allowed to go up to 1 kilometer. Whereas in our Himalayan region, I've noticed that tourists being a factor of attraction. It's a bane and a brunt at the same time. Why? Because also of the approach of the army area very close to our borders, it brings our tourists also very close to those areas, leading to a lot of pollution, black carbon soot, which is coming out from the cars. It deposits on the snow and leads to more melting of the snow. That's a little factor. But then in one of the glaciers that I studied also in my PhD, the Changme Khangpu Glacier, there were studies shown that the effects of Nagasima, Hiroshima, in Japan, the particles were also seen in glaciers in Sikkim. So it's a global phenomena. So we need not only have Indian laws, we also need to have a integrated climate governance for this. And the call to have, this international year is so crucial. And what I also want to emphasize here is the challenges for glaciologists, because geomorphology is changing. And also, I want to also mention about this winter time when we need, water the most, especially even in the Eastern Himalayas, because we do not have monsoon in the winters. It's only during we don't have monsoon rains during the winters. And we've already been facing, we're already facing droughts in most of the regions. A few of the best examples, best practices that we've seen around is Uttarakhand sanctifying a glacier. That was very proud. That was a very proud moment. That was a big step. The other was me being a part of the Sikkim Glacier Commission, the state coming together saying that let's look at glacier as an entity is another way. And there are various researchers, glaciologists also who are bringing out policies, to make Glacier Commission in each of the states to study it in a more detailed way. I do not want to go into the depth of it, but I think I will continue in our other discussion. So just wanted to give a very broad name to our glaciers so that we are close to them and we see what's happening, and also to acknowledge these terms, and all these phases, what's happening. So yeah, thank you. I'll leave with that so we have more time for discussion.
Thank you so much, Smriti. That was fascinating. It really truly felt like, you're back in school, understanding the structure of the glacier, the moraines, something that I remember very well from my geography classes. And thank you for highlighting, and depicting it so beautifully through the figures and explaining how it is melting, where it is melting, and what are the challenges of the hanging glaciers and the geomorphological changes that are coming, and the impacts on animals like the yak, and how the herding community is going to be affected now. And it was very critical that you also highlighted tourism being a boon or a bane, which I think is again remains a big question, and the need for the integrated climate governance. So thank you so much. We'll hold on to our questions. And now over to Ushashi Datta.
Thank you so much, Bhargavi ma'am. Thank you, everybody on the esteemed panel. I've had so much to learn from each one of you. Am I audible? Okay, great. So the topic that we're talking about today holds a lot of relevance for me personally because I'm a lawyer by my professional background, and I'm working currently with the Council on Energy, Environment and Water as a Global South Fellow. So all in all, my professional background, my current standing is very relevant to what we're talking about today. I'd like to take a moment to thank Dr. Nangyal, Dr. Datta, and Dr. Basnett for their fascinating insights into this critical issue. The urgent need for a glacial law and the governance framework in India, while that's an essential critical part of today's discussion, in my personal opinion, I feel like we do have a lot of laws in this country, and adding one onto it may not be the best foot forward. As Dr. Datta had also mentioned, that before you have laws coming in, you need to have an underlying understanding what are the impacts of glacial changes, and also as Dr. Basnett mentioned, that not to make it impersonal, but to get a sense of understanding of the names of glaciers and the other scientific terminologies attached to it. While I understand it's a very hyper-focused topic, it may be scientific and not something that is palatable to the public at large when you're talking from a policy aspect. So maybe looking into that aspect and first trying to break down scientific understanding into something more palatable for researchers, for people in non-profit organizations, for civil societies and think tanks, etc., and then maybe proceed from there. So while it's important to have some sort of a legal understanding and to have some sort of a legal backing to protect glaciers and to preserve ecosystems and ensure that communities in and around these areas are protected, it's extremely important to understand that the glacial understanding or the understanding of natural resources is still very primitive, and it's kind of restricted to if you would say a colonial way forward. So natural resources as an understanding needs to be increased first. Things related to climate policy, climate change evolves day in and day out. There are a lot of terminologies, it's a lot of understanding of processes that needs to change. And while I understand it's vast and it's expanding, and maybe not all of it can be covered under, say, an act, but is extremely important for, say, parliamentarians to have this discussion, to have this debate. to see how you can make way for these laws or these understanding of terms in what we already have. Having said that, of course, it's quite critical if we have a dedicated climate law and maybe glaciers feature as a part of it, and not have a standalone glacial law, because every natural resource in some way or the other needs protection. And to have a dedicated law for every one of those natural resources may become challenging for a country like India, which is so diverse. And taking example of Switzerland or say Bhutan, etc., may not work for India, may not work for our socio economic circumstances, may not work for the way that we're geographically placed either. While a lot of these countries are also mountainous and they have important glaciers as well, to transpose things that they do directly onto us may not be very relevant for us. But having said that, having these exchange of information, cross pollination of ideas, expanding regional networks, and collaborating with researchers across countries may give an understanding of how we look into glaciers, glacial health, etc. So the topic that I've been given today is to look into what the policy gaps and opportunities are in glacial conservation. I'll begin by saying, as I was mentioning earlier, that there's a lack of targeted focus on glacial conservation, especially in law. So what I mean by that is that the basic understanding of natural resources law need to be expanded. And only when you expand that can you dedicate any part of your legal understanding or any part of protection and conservation towards a natural resource. Now, in 2017, the Uttarakhand High Court had awarded personhood to glaciers. So what that essentially means is that glaciers were treated as or are treated as legal persons, and they have rights equivalent to what citizens of this country have. But again, the practical realities of it is something that still needs to be explored. But that also presents itself as an opportunity because it gives legal researchers, lawyers, jurists, people interested in legal jurisprudence to explore this aspect and see how it is that these rights that are being bestowed by courts to natural resources, such as, say, glaciers, can be translated into conservation purposes for them. Now, in 2024, the National Green Tribunal also took suo motu cognizance of a report that spoke about glacial lake flooding. So, while courts are stepping up to take cognizance of what's happening, however, unfortunately, the laws of our country cannot just be made by courts. You have to involve the legislature, and there needs to be some sort of dedicated conversation that is taking place in terms of these conservation effects at a parliament level as well. So something which is collaborative in nature between courts, between parliaments, maybe say standalone MPs or collectively as a whole, will probably drive political will. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much we study and how much of information we circulate around, to get it to the right political channel or to the right platforms is something that will ultimately drive conservation efforts in the longer run. Having said that, I also feel like, as Dr. Basnett mentioned, that there are a lot of studies, research, etc., that's taking place. However, since it's scientific in nature, it might not be widely accessible to a lot of people. Now, also having said that, I realize the downside of this is to make such scientific information palatable to many may be a challenge. So working together with researchers who may be able to digest down these complex scientific terms might also give a holistic understanding to, say, local communities or people interested in glacial conservation efforts, etc. Now, as Dr. Datta was mentioning earlier, that it's extremely important to connect with the local communities in order to avoid any conflicts that are there on the ground, which is absolutely correct, and I agree with him. As researchers, as scientists, or even legal professionals who may be interested in glacial conservation, there's only so much that they would know if they're outside of that region. So it is always best to connect with people who live and breathe that ecosystem on day in, day out, and are aware of like the nitty-gritties of how it is that they can, protect their environment, and bypassing them or not listening to what inputs they have may not just lead to conflict, but may also delay any kind of policy action. So it's extremely crucial to get these people on board. And by on board, I mean have regular interactions with them, try to take in the local knowledge or indigenous understanding of what they have of the area. And while I understand there may be language challenges, etc., so it has to be broken down into multiple levels. We often say that not much is happening, or something should happen, but say bringing out a law or some sort of a policy and then just applying them in a blanket fashion to areas where glaciers are uh, there may not be something that is fruitful in the longer run. Because if there's no understanding of what is the need of this law, what is the need of this policy, and how it is that collaboration can lead it into a better fruitful product, there's no purpose of having any such law or having any such legal framework. Now, glaciers, as I mentioned, like, it's a natural resource, and having a dedicated framework for it would be extremely difficult. However, given that fact that some sort of concerted effort should be taken in order to understand how we can protect these better, looking into monitoring their health on a real-time basis is also something that we can work on. Now, I would say while work is happening, the Indian government through its various bodies at central, state, local levels is monitoring or has deployed certain bodies that are in touch with certain universities, etc., to monitor glacial health at different parts and times. But in my opinion, it's scattered, and there's not much clarity on how much of cross-pollination of information or ideas takes place. So there is scattered work that may be happening. There may be work that's happening in communities that are in touch with each other. But we're a vast country, and knowledge from one place to the other, if it is not effectively communicated, then there can be a delay and lag in policy action. So this kind of policy disconnect is something that we need to first tackle. And once we have an understanding of this, through this promote the understanding and expand the idea of glacial health. Why is it important? And as Dr. Namgyal was mentioning earlier, that permafrost protection is also something that we need to look into, and it should be something that should feature in policy discussions and understanding. I had also authored an article for CW in which I did speak about how cryosphere is melting, and there's not a lot of focus on this on a dedicated level. So permafrost thawing not only is something which may cause loss to biodiversity in and around it, but it could also release a carbon trapped under it. It could also release pathogens, etc., that may be trapped under it. While research has happened in the Arctic region, there may be similar potentials in the Himalayas as well. I'm not a scientific expert to say if work is being done in that front or not. But yes, I do believe that having these critical conversations is extremely important to common people who, on a day in day out basis, may not be so concerned with things of this sort. So, for example, I'll give a small example of policy decisions that may concern people. So air pollution is a grappling issue for Delhi, and say discussions regarding stubble burning air pollution is something that Delhi might be talking about. But Delhi is also the powerhouse of the country, and that's where most of the decision makers reside. So how is it that you can connect Delhi as a powerhouse of decision making to regions that are very far from it geographically? But it's extremely crucial to understand that even if it is far off, it is going to have a very direct and tangible impact on, say, the center, and not just to like communities, mountainous communities that will first, of course, be the face the direct impact of glaciers melting and the rise of sea level, etc. So it's also important to connect different states that are closer to these regions and further away, to understand that we holistically as a country must look into the conservation efforts and things that would help make policy decisions to be taken easier. I would really like to thank this organization for taking this effort to have this discussion and this discourse, because even within 9 people to have this sort of a discussion and then go ahead and talk about it also leads to dissemination of information, which again goes in the longer run in terms of getting the conversation started, getting that kind of momentum driven, because no matter how much you write, having a discussion, talking to people is a more emotive way of connecting, and making sure that policies in a longer run can be formulated and cross-pollination of ideas to take place. Some of the opportunities that we can look into in terms of glacial conservation is have some sort of an enhanced international cooperation. What I mean to say is that glaciers are without borders, so cross border collaboration is something that we can look into, and this can only happen through, say, international agreements or regional frameworks. But instead of having a broader understanding of, say, mountains or glaciers, maybe looking into region-wise understanding of their terminologies, or having follow-up reports on glacial health for different glaciers across the world is something we should look into. Maybe having countries, collaborate together, share resources, have a dedicated data set which every country or, say, research organization can access, can update, is something that is extremely crucial. And keeping information restricted to, I mean, of course, unless it's sensitive information, keeping information restricted to a country will only take policy decisions so far. So if you don't collaborate and exchange resources, exchange information, it's very difficult to ensure that international cooperation takes place. Like at COPs, we talk about how mountain health is important, and mountainous communities and countries do put forward their points and say we need to protect glaciers, we need to preserve their health. But it's often under discussed as to how you have to start from a really micro level to attain that macro goal that you pitch at these international climate forums. So that is an opportunity that we have. Also, exploring the different technological advancements. AI based data analysis is something that we're all discussing in different spheres of our lives at this point in time. Satellite technology, remote sensing is something that organizations in this country are already doing. ISRO is working towards it. Cross collaboration between ISRO, NASA, etc., can also help go in longer ways. Of course, those are projects that experts would have more opinions on how you can further it, whether at all it can be furthered or not. But it is something that we can give thought behind and see how you come up with something dedicated towards glaciers. And instead of having a dedicated law, maybe having these dedicated efforts could go in the longer way of protecting glaciers and ensuring their conservation. The other thing that I would like to again reiterate is that involving local communities goes to a longer effort, because they're people who understand what their tailored needs are, because they're relying every day or directly on like glaciers for water, agriculture, and etc., any other resources. So building that kind of a partnership with local communities and taking their traditional knowledge into account for conservation planning and strategies is definitely something that I would recommend to any researcher or legal professionals who might be interested in studying this. So it's a scope and opportunity for lawyers all over the country who are not only interested in, say, environmental law, but understanding these nuanced upcomings that are taking place in the climate policy world, that some way or the other will have some connection with law. We definitely don't have a climate law in place at this point in time, but I'm sure, given the rate at which climate crisis is aggravating, something or the other will definitely come up in the future. And once it does, there should be people ready to take on that understanding and contributing towards that efforts. And I feel like that time is now to get an understanding of how the climate is impacting us, what are the terminologies, what is it that the processes, what is it that researchers are trying to talk about, people in the scientific community are talking about. Because unless you match science, policy, law all together, any kind of legal intervention is not going to be very fruitful. You can have a legal intervention, but that will only have a limited impact. If you want to actually see a sustainable future, then to get a scientific understanding, then break it down for common policy understanding and spreading across to decision makers, etc., is extremely crucial, because that distilled down effect is what is going to make any kind of law effective. So yeah, to summarize, I would say that it goes a long way to understand policies first before creating any kind of law, whether you want to do a dedicated framework for conservation and protection, or whether you would like to integrate it with the existing laws, but without having an underlying understanding and sense of what is it that you want to achieve in the longer run, it would be very difficult to have, say, standalone laws, etc., to protect, say, glaciers.
Thank you, Ushashi, for articulating it so well. You truly highlighted the unknown threats with the melting of glaciers and what kind of health risks it might have. And you also brought in the example of air pollution. I think that's a great example in the context of the melting of snow as well, because with air pollution, what we did was we said, we don't have enough data, we need more measurements, so let's just have more data everywhere. And so many years down the line, I think much of that work started in 2016-17, and with all the monitoring that's happening everywhere, other than discussing AQI, there's very little that has happened in the context of governance when it comes to air pollution. So thanks for highlighting that. And also about, you spoke about the powerhouse of decision making being the center. Another fear that emerged while you were talking about it was this, if we do have some kind of a central law, something like the Disaster Management Act, then again it will be the center determining what actions to be taken, who needs to do what, and everything will be centrally controlled. So I think there again the need to go back to our 73rd, 74th Amendment is very crucial, because every local government, every panchayat, every town, every municipality can determine what kind of action needs to take place depending on the region that they are. What are the occupations there, the livelihoods that are supported on those landscapes, and accordingly each region can come out with its own actions and some kind of control mechanisms to stop further melting. So it was also, while you were talking, I was also reminded, like we do have hundreds of parastatals and hundreds of agencies today, and there is absolutely no coordination between each other. So creating one more entity for it, so say like the National Biodiversity Authority, we'll probably create one more authority. And how much would that help, were questions that were on my mind as you were talking. But I think on the whole, from all our speakers, we learned a lot, and we could open it for questions now. Priyanka, do you want to take the questions?
Yes, ma'am, sure.
Okay.
Also, do we straight jump to the questions, or did you want to cross question with the panelists first?
I thought in case there are similar questions, I didn't want to waste time. So first we would give an opportunity to our audience, I thought, and then.
All right. We have 3 questions in the Q&A box, and I would like to read them out since we're a little short on time as well.
Yeah.
So whichever the panelist, whomsoever it suits, can answer these questions. Our first question is by Aishwarya Sanas, and she is asking, if a glacial preservation law is to be made in India, how would it look like? In Argentina, although the law has been diluted a lot over the years, started as a means to protect glaciers from actions of mining companies largely, not a primary concern in India, since a law is generally framed as the right to something or the protection against something. What would it look like in the case of India?
So, Ashwarya, to answer this question, I'd like to go back to the example that I had cited earlier, that in 2017, the Uttarakhand High Court recognized legal personhood for glaciers, which basically means that they have the rights equivalent to citizens of India, or others can sue on behalf of them. So if you intentionally or unintentionally harm the glacier, that would be disturbing its surrounding, or to in any way contribute towards the harm of it, you are somebody who is liable to be punished under, say, the environmental protection laws or other penal laws, etc. So how it would look like is the practicality, that is something that needs to be explored. So to the best of my knowledge, this has not been challenged at the Supreme Court so far. So this is again similar to the right against adverse effects of climate change, in which the Great Indian Bustard judgment is something that courts discussed, and power transmission lines was an issue in that particular judgment. But the practicalities of what is it if you violate somebody's rights, so say somebody is affected by extreme heat, a rising temperature, can they go to court and say, I was harmed and demand compensation, is something that has not arisen yet. So we'll have to wait and see how it is that climate litigation or laws develop, because as of now it's pretty much at an academic level and at a policy level, so we're simply discussing. But it's really up to the lawmakers to see how they would frame and what is it that they would wish to include. While you've mentioned that mining is not a concern for us, if at all is to look like, we'll probably have to define what do you mean by glacier preservation, what all would come under it, different levels of snow and things like those sorts. So there'll have to be a lot of discussion with the scientific communities to then come up with something which is a glacier preservation.
May I just have a short comment on that?
Sure, Soumya.
It's one thing that mining is definitely a concern in today's context, in the Indian Himalayas and the lower Himalayas. Multiple states have major mining proposals. That's one. So one of the approaches of any law of protection or prevention of loss or prevention of degradation is banning some activities. That's obviously, if you look at the Air Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, Forest Conservation Act, everywhere, it's banning a whole set of activities which are highly detrimental to preservation of that. So that definitely is a component which we need today, because right from Jammu and Kashmir to Himachal and Uttarakhand, there are a lot of mining which is already going on, including limestone mining, and lithium mining is proposed not in the glacier zone, but not too far if you in the crow flying distance, the straight line distance. So that's one whole set of activities that you don't do this. Like in India, at one point of time, we had no-go zones for forests, which has been thrown out. So that's one whole set of activity. The second set of activities is how you can, in the legal setup, how you can integrate what is in the interest of local livelihoods and local economies into, and how it preserves, and how you can then, through that activity, sort of exclude large scale activities which are far more damaging, because nothing can be zero impact. You will have an impact. And that, as I said, and also Ushashi has also pointed out, Indian Himalayas are very, very different from all the other countries that have implemented these laws.
Thank you, sir. I think Dr. Namgil, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I think that it is very important for people like us in Ladakh, for instance. We are really relying.
I think we've lost him.
I'm trying to raise my hand, but I can't raise my hand. So if
Yeah, please, you go ahead.
Yes, Smriti,
till
go
he
ahead.
comes back, he's frozen.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. All this talk, like at this moment in life, I was a little blurred by a researcher's point of view in how much you try to do, how much you bring to the table, and you wanna give us, a signal saying that this is what we've done is dangerous, do something, act. But then I've seen the process from the beginning to the end, where I've even had meetings and convened meetings in Delhi at the, where was it? I think the Constitution Club with the Standing Committee of Water, just 3 years before the GLOF in Sikkim took place, you know. So I think in India and rest of the world, only after an event happens or a tragedy happens, then we wake up. That's one. But again, looking deep into it, you know, when you talk about the question here, which was rightly raised, as in how would the conservation lobby or preservation lobby? Now we have one sector where we have water as a state issue, as a state subject. And then you have the boundaries, the flow, you know, which doesn't have any boundaries again. That's one. The other is now whom are you making these laws for? Or even if you have a right for the glaciers, like who do you point out at? Do you point out at the local residents who is burning the fossil fuel because there is no reach to you know, controlled gas or your good fuel? And there are even schools in those high mountains where in terms of fees you give fuel wood as your fee. And then whom do you blame again, where you have lots of users down in the foothills, where you have people using air conditioners from the electricity generated by these hydropower projects. Who are the users here again? And then again, it's all behavioral changes, you know. It's so complicated. It's just, I don't have an answer to what the law is going to look like, but these are what we've been facing. As a researcher, all we can give is bring it. But then I've seen over many years, we just talk about it and it just lies in, you know, papers or it's there. But where is the implementation? Who is failing us? How do we become more proactive? And for how long can we be whistleblowers and say, you know, this is good, this is... So I do not have a question. I just see that it has to be integrated. Not only like local communities also face problems. We live there. We also have national and international players also in all of this. So my answer cannot just be one saying that we can have this, this, or this. It has to be, I think, just. It has to be a just law. It has to be just transition, and it has to be done in a very detailed way where the locals have to be the main players in making these decisions. Yes.
Yes, thank you. Very true, very true. Yeah, I think Professor Sas Biswas has two questions. So he says, may I know whether successional patterns with climate smart flora, excluding C3 and C4 species from lower elevation to higher, could be considered to check the melting and developing microclimate? And the second question is seeking opinion of panelists on micro policy on glacier at micro ecosystem in context to local community, livelihood, and government policy makers. Who would like to take that up? Anybody on the flora issue, the C3, C4 plants?
Still reading the questions. I think I did answer the second part where the micro policy and micro ecosystem, it's all integrated in context of local community livelihood. Because I know even when we were studying glaciers, they would be so apprehensive, you know, the local communities, they would think that maybe these researchers, scientists are going there because they have this myth that there's a lot of gold under the glacier. That was one. The other was there are days, you know, we have days for mountains, we have days for lakes, we worship them. So it also has a lot of importance. These traditional values have also, I think, sanctified. There are many mountain peaks where you cannot climb in Sikkim. These are one way of protection, I feel, where the local has played a very active role in protecting. And there are many other communities also. So they stepping up has in fact triggered so many ways of conservation and protection in the local level. So I think that has to be acknowledged. Whereas I don't know if I can answer anybody here. I think maybe Chuang was able to answer the ecology part, but let me try at that. May I know whether succession pattern in climate smart flora? Okay. Okay. I mean, like, yes, in terms of maybe, you know, I will switch to maybe what I think Professor Bishwas is trying to say is those hybrid tolerant, resistant, temperature resistant flora, fauna, which we already see happening. Areas where there were no bananas, there are bananas, plantains growing now. Even for yaks, when I was studying, doing documentary on yak herders, there was also a question whether, you know, hybrid yaks need to be tune to the temperature with geoengineering techniques. So there are also another way, like if you want to be hopeful and live, it's like, okay, we're going to have bad days coming ahead, but we also have humans with AI and geoengineering techniques. So I think I would just want to balance both and say yes and no together. Yes.
Thank you. Aishwarya has one more question in the chat box, which says very recently the glacier agenda has been moved from MOFCC to Ministry of Jal Shakti. This itself is telling of how government perceives glacier melting and related issues. In light of this, do you think that the existing water river laws can be moved about to include glaciers in its definition? Something similar happened in the case of Argentina. Or was this answered earlier? No, I don't think so.
I can take this. So, whether it should be included or, I mean, in my personal opinion, definitely, that's what I was referring to, that you need to expand the meaning of natural resources and, include specific terminologies instead of bunching them up together as natural resource, because in law, then that is open to a lot of interpretation. You'll first start distilling as to what do you mean by natural resources, what are the elements that come under natural resources. But if we want to focus on dedicated conservation of a natural resource, it's of course important to include that in the laws that we have. But again, just including glaciers would also open up like a Pandora's box for what are the other, resources that you would also like to include. So as I mentioned earlier, you need to have a holistic first understanding of why do you need to include glaciers, have a detailed conversation with the scientific community, with local communities, then figure out what is it that you exactly want to put, instead of say, just saying protect glaciers, because it goes much beyond that. Once it's there in law, there will be a lot of interpretations that will come to it. So there needs to be a lot of discussions before, you can state that whether or not it should just be included. But in my personal opinion, it is definitely something that we should talk about in our laws, whether we make a standalone one, whether, we integrate it holistically with other climate issues, or whether we just, amend and add it to the existing laws.
Thank you, Ushashi. Soumya?
I think I have a comment on this moving the agenda of glaciers to Ministry of Jal Shakti. In fact, if you look at the agenda of Ministry of Jal Shakti, it's basically exploitation of the rivers, supply of water. So it's very clear, because even though the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change is not really doing its work, even if it is there in that ministry is supposed to look after protection of the environment as a whole, try to prevent climate change, accelerating, though it is doing the opposite in many cases. That's another matter. But we already have, one wants to understand also, we already have a national action plan on climate change, which is not much, but under that, there are missions. There is a national water mission, and there is a national mission for sustaining sustainable Himalayan ecosystems. So if the government's intention was really to protect the glaciers, then that could have been taken up under those. By moving it to the Ministry of Jal Shakti, and if you look at the National Water Mission ideas, it's all about making big dams in the Himalayas. It's all about storing the water. So it's very clear that moving this as an agenda, and they are not thinking about protecting the cryosphere areas. They are thinking of how, in this scenario of climate change, accelerating melting, early summer flash floods, and later drying up, how they can keep doing more hydropower and more big reservoirs. So that, in my understanding, it's a negative move, and this will happen more and more if the focus do not change.
Thank you so much. Dr. Namgel, we lost you, so kindly go ahead and share your thoughts.
Yeah, sorry, I think there is a connectivity issue here. So what I was saying is just related to this question, that if we amend the existing water laws in the states and include provisions about the glaciers, I think that would be easier at this stage, instead of like working on a full-fledged and standalone law for the glaciers. I think that would be easier, and I think it's extremely important. And I'm a bit surprised that this really did not come until now up for discussion. And it's really thanks to you that this discussion, this has now come into the public forum to discuss about the importance of glaciers. That said, then I also agree with Soumya Dutta and Ushashi that until and unless people see the importance of having this kind of policies and acts, it's one thing to have all these legislations, but quite another to implement them on the ground. And so it's a very important, I think, to raise awareness among people about the melting glaciers, what people can to do and must do. For instance, in the Zanskar Valley, over the last 5 years or so, we have provided point and shoot cameras to villagers, and they are taking pictures of these glaciers uh, regularly every year, so that we can have a photo documentation of the retreat of the glaciers. I mean, if I don't know if that data can be used to kind of conclude anything, but at least it would put in people's consciousness the fact of that these glaciers are retreating. So it's very extremely important to raise awareness about the cryosphere. A lot of people talk about hydrosphere and atmosphere and all of these, but for us, people like us in Ladakh, the cryosphere is very important, and very little is taught about them in the schools and in our educational institutions. So I think I would emphasize first that to create that fertile ground to have a policy and legislation, and that have to have that implemented effectively. First, we need to raise awareness among people is something that I wanted to kind of share. And since I kind of just went off, the other thing is that recently we have these traditional governance system called Goba system in Ladakh, and this is extremely important traditional governance system. And recently, we have been able to convince villagers to have members or roles designated for people to kind of manage and look after tourism issues, the environmental issues, and we can kind of build this into the traditional governance system if maybe some people within that system who can look after some of these issues, the glaciers and that kind of thing. So because since we are talking about this affecting people on the ground, it's extremely important that they understand the importance of having these legislations and act is something that I just wanted to share.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was actually on my mind. Like, given that there are probably 6 states, union territories, which are the glacial states in India, and in each region, if the local communities, the traditional knowledge can come together and local action can be built, was one idea. And of course, also strengthening the local governance in the context of the 73rd, 74th Amendment. And also talking about the major glaciers in India itself, if any of our speakers would like to kind of take that also, whether it is Siachen, Gangotri, or Hispar, Milam, there are so many. If there's more information on mapping from which state to which state it's flowing, or where it is, and if local people can do their bit to protect that region, would that be helpful as such? Of course, this is very, very local action, and there's a lot that needs to be done at the global level, but these are just thoughts. Yeah, Ushashi?
Yeah, I just want to add a quick point, with reference to what Dr. Namgyal was saying, that, locals have been given cameras to take pictures of these, glacial regions. So I recently was involved in a project with CEW where, we contributed towards the 4th biennial report that India just submitted to the UNFCCC. So, as a part of that report, we helped contribute towards a chapter which is the domestic measurement, reporting and verification, which essentially looks into how government, actions, particularly climate actions, are being tracked, and their effectivity is being tracked. So one such mobile application, that is also using this kind of crowdsourcing for pollution data related, which is called as the Bhuvan Ganga app, that comes under the Ministry of Jal Shakti. They distribute these samples, etc., that to locals, that you can dip that into the water and take their levels of testing, and use that, upload that data on this mobile app, and in this way they're sort of crowdsourcing information related to pollution. So I think that also goes in a long way to monitor glacial health, because things like this are already happening. So while it's happening for water pollution, I'm sure efforts like this could also go a long way in community participation and this collective way of working, where you utilize collective participation to gather data that may otherwise be a challenge for you if locals don't want to cooperate.
Thank you so much. Anybody else wants to add? Smriti, Soumya? Yeah, Dr. Nandini.
If there's nobody, I also wanted to just talk about there are a lot of talks about the green technology, renewable energy, and all of that. And Soumya Dutta talked about the solar projects coming up in Ladakh, and similar kind of projects elsewhere also. At the face of it, they look very attractive because they are renewable and all of that. But in places like Ladakh, just imagine. To set up all these solar structures, all of them they would need to be transported to Ladakh in trucks and all of that. And we can imagine that these trucks stopping at these high passes and spewing black carbon, and that all that carbon going on and settling on the glaciers, that would really lead to a lot of melting of glaciers. And so at the face of it, I think they might be attractive, sound attractive, but they have a lot of environmental cost that is not apparent at the face of it. And these are things that we also need to think about when we talk about these renewable energy projects in the Himalayas, in places like Ladakh, for instance.
Very true, very true. The transition to renewable energy everywhere seems more like a band-aid solution and a quick fix. Nobody anywhere is talking really about reducing the degrowth, of everything. If we can just leave nature to herself and just move away from there, stop consuming, stop living the kind of lives we lead, really go back to the very basics. That is something that is truly needed everywhere. And I think we have another few minutes. So I will give each of you one minute to share your last thoughts. But before you share your last thoughts, a couple of you have already said that scientific awareness at the local level is very much needed. Again, I just returned from a village where granite mining has been stopped, and one of the local villagers told me, this hill was like gold to us, and the government stopped us from mining it. So, everywhere, whether it is legal or illegal mining, mining for all kinds of resources, and what is below the glaciers, all of this needs to be put across to the local people in a language and in a way they understand. It's not that they don't know. It's just that, there is so much of the so-called development in inverted commas everywhere. So that is a very confusing term for everybody. So, and then taking their knowledge into all the local action, pushing each of the glacial states to take up something locally. I think that would be the right way to address this issue, rather than jumping into framing another big law and creating agencies for that. And all our speakers have highlighted now how easy it is to just get your permission to any of the big infrastructure projects. So creating law, while I'm not totally against creating the law, while law is important, maybe strengthening something that we already have, as Ushashi and Soumya and others have highlighted, would probably be the best thing to go with. And plan the conservation of the glaciers at a regional level, at a small level, at the from a ground up level would be the best way to go. Yeah, so now each of you closing thoughts on it would be great. We could start from Ushashi.
Thank you, Bhargavi ma'am. I think you've mostly summarized, this great discussion in a way that I don't think I can add further to. But yes, of course, just a final couple of, insights is that, as you rightly mentioned, that, involving local communities is extremely important in any kind of decision-making process. But, just not because their interests are involved, but also because you have to first understand what is it that they're trying to protect, and what are their belief systems that are attached to it. Because as much as you'd like to leave it at the fact that they worship natural resources as gods, deities, etc., but it's also extremely important to get that understanding to them in maybe languages they understand, or explanations they understand, that simply protecting them because they're a deity is not good enough. Because if you're starting from a bottom up approach, it's extremely important for that stakeholder to be aware of something that, somebody who's a desk researcher like me is sitting and doing. But while I'm, speaking this in a more articulate fashion, it's extremely important for them to understand this articulately, but in their own way, and get that sense and that, that agency of why is it that they should say something in terms of whatever policy or decision making is being taking, and how it is that they can continue to keep that agency with them. Because in the longer run, unless you involve, say, decision makers and the local community and sort of bridge this gap, no amount of law or no amount of policy intervention is going to be fruitful or something that will stay for the long run.
True. Thank you. Dr. Smriti? Dr. Smriti, a couple of final thoughts from you? Okay, maybe we could go to Soumya. Soumya?
Okay, I think two important points. One is we need to prioritize. See, there are a lot of adverse impacts on the cryosphere. And if we just confine that to the Indian Himalayan region and sub-Himalayan region, there are multiple impacts, but some are much stronger, some are minor, comparatively minor. The other point is there are a whole lot of impacts which is not controllable by any law made in India or here, which are of global nature. And we all understand very clearly that damage to the cryosphere anywhere, including Indian Himalayas and the South Asian Himalayas, is very unlike the kind of damages we do by a mining somewhere or deforestation somewhere, because that's largely controllable by local factors. And if the local political actors can be taken into confidence and can be moved, you can check it. But in this case, it depends a lot on global action. So that's one factor which is not dependent on any law related to glaciers or cryosphere. That's related directly to whether we can really stop global warming from progressing further. But the other factors are there are impacts like several of us mentioned things that which are locally generated impacts. So in that case, we need to prioritize in terms of what benefit it accords to the local population and what are the costs on the cryosphere areas. And based on that, we need to prioritize which are absolutely to be no-go, you don't do it in there, or which can be controlled and regulated, and which can be tolerated to a large extent. I think this approach will give us a much better sort of framework how to protect and simultaneously let people enjoy the benefits of those cryosphere areas.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Smriti.
Sorry, I just couldn't turn my camera on with the mic glitches. But yes, I mean, I think everyone play the roles. Everybody does their bit here. It's because, as I also explained, and also how Dattaji said, it's like also it's a global phenomena where you can't make boundaries, political boundaries over a glacier and say this is mine, this is yours. It's global in a way. I think what we lack is, I think, leadership, no matter where. For instance, even in Sikkim, we do have local governance. We have this system called the Pipan system. Even before Indian laws came, they did have an environmental law, their own local governance, that went so much in preserving. There are even areas where like yaks are not to graze, and they have been doing this for centuries. So that's one thing to learn from them. So I think what we lack here is leadership, no matter whether they're changing the glacier study from MOEF to Jal Shakti. Well, I think everybody has its role and part to play. But I think what is missing here is integrating it, like a transdisciplinary research. Science is what we do at Future Earth, bringing all stakeholders together. But here too, it just drops at, just maybe like this platform here. We're talking about commemorating the year of glaciers, preserving it, that's there. But it goes in paper again if you don't implement and go ahead. There's a lot of gap here again because I was very much in the middle of it where we knew something bad is going to happen to glaciers in Sikkim. Even presented it in the standing committee of water, So how do we break these barriers is one question. The other is management. I think what should also be looking at when we make glacial laws is also the management issue. Like when has widening roads ever helped us in reducing traffic? Same way, if you have alternate means for keeping people's demand up, it's also about conservation and management, I think, in today's age and time, because we are worried about what's going to happen. Because like I said in my talk, that what happened in Narasimha and Hirasaki, because of those activities there, we could even see particles in Sikkim. So of course we need, I think, all levels of leadership here together to integrate and make it a solid law for the glaciers, where at least glaciers can speak and see that, I'm also somebody living, and yeah. So I think that's what I want to say.
Thank you for highlighting, the importance of everybody's role for a long-term impact. Yes, thank you. I think again, Dr. Namgale is dropped. His internet probably is bad. So thank you. On that note, I think that was an excellent discussion, and there was so much that we all learned, and I think I will look forward to a year filled with a lot more conversations, a lot more learning, and seeing what best can be done, and how each of us can contribute to this in ensuring this International Year for Glaciers will truly bring about some kind of positive action. Thank you. Over to Priyanka for the closure.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think Dr. Namgale is joining back. I think we can have his comments,
Okay.
quick comments, yes.
Dr. Namgale, your closing thoughts?
Well, I don't know. I was just moving up and down, trying to get some better connectivity. But I think my closing comments would be that it is extremely important that we take these things seriously, because initially I told you that 1/3 of the world's population is dependent on the Himalayan glaciers for their drinking and irrigation water. So it's extremely important that we started thinking about some of these things, and before getting into the meat of really working on a working legislation, it is very important to sensitize and raise awareness, as I said, that and also do whatever possible at the village level, at the grassroots level, because that is very important. And I think in places like Ladakh, we are quite often misplaced in terms of understanding some of these things, and that is we have to blame our education system for that. because India is such a diverse country that the geoclimatic reality is quite different for every state, and we need to understand those idiosyncrasies and then work accordingly. And for places like Ladakh, for instance, today there is a lot of people go around tom-tomming about turning Ladakh or converting Ladakh into a carbon neutral region, but the for carbon neutrality to happen, we need to think about the grasslands, and a lot of students these days are concerned about deforestation and things like that. We don't have any forests in Ladakh, but that is we have to blame our education system there, because it was just kind of crammed in our minds that forest deforestation is a big issue. It's not a big issue in Ladakh, and we are destroying all the alpine meadows in places like Ladakh. They are the ones that are sequestering all the carbon when we talk about carbon sequestration. So we need to make sure that these alpine meadows are healthy, to have Ladakh as a carbon neutral region. We need to take care of those resources, and solar projects. A lot of people ask me, being in a colleges, I must tell the rest of the country that in places like Ladakh, these wild animals need a lot of space to move around and acquire the kind of resources to survive. Because, as you would imagine, the rangelands, the resources are quite scattered, so they have to move around quite a lot, unlike an animal in the tropical forest or in the plains, where the resources are quite concentrated and they can do away with small areas. But places like Ladakh, they have to move it quite a lot. So even taking small spaces for these kind of energy projects would really harm the ecosystem. And yeah, so I have a lot of things to share on the ecological front, but we don't have the time. But these are some thoughts from the top of my head, and I think I really think that people all across the Himalayas need to come together for this, because, as you rightly mentioned, that we have a few states where the cryosphere kind of has high significance. And we need to, all the Himalayan states need to come together and really make a noise about it, so that we have some sort of a legislation, if it's not a standalone legislation, as Sushashi was talking about, but something that we can do, maybe to amend and modify the current existing water laws in the states, and then have something at least. So to kind of start with this, my closing remarks. Yeah, thanks so much for this connectivity issue. I haven't been able to really participate fully in the discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, Priyanka.
Thank you to all our panelists for joining us here today, for giving us your time. And with that, I think I'll proceed to the formal vote of thanks for today's discussion. And as we come to the end of today's discussion, I, Priyanka Negi, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks. On behalf of the IMPRI Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you for participating in today's deliberation titled Melting Realities, the Urgent Need for a Glacial Law and Governance Framework in India. Our deepest thanks to our chair, Ms. Bhargavi Rao ji, and our experts for today's deliberation. Thank you to all our esteemed panelists for their insightful and thought-provoking addresses. Your expertise and perspectives have greatly enriched today's discussion and provided us with valuable takeaways on this critical topic. We deeply appreciate your time and contributions. We would also like to thank all the participants who joined us live or through Zoom webinar and raised pertinent questions and contributed to today's dialogue. For those watching us later on YouTube or listening to our podcast or reading our publications, we deeply value your engagement and interest. We hope you continue to join us in future to the IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning programs. Wishing you all a very wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank you, ma'am.
much.
Good evening.